Welcome back to Flagstone Trail. We're continuing our deep dive into Robert Greene's 48 Laws of Power. And today we're tackling a law that might seem pretty simple on the surface, but has some real depth to it when you start to unpack it.
Definitely agree with you there.
Law 10, infection. Avoid the unhappy and unlucky. Now, I know we've all heard the advice to stay positive and avoid negative people, but Greene takes this concept a step further and frames it as a strategic imperative for anyone seeking power or success.
Absolutely. He argues that just like a disease, negativity can spread from person to person, and that this emotional contagion, as he calls it, can have a serious impact on our well-being and our ability to achieve our goals.
So it's not just about feeling good. It's about protecting ourselves from something that can actually hinder our progress.
Right. And it's about recognizing that this negativity can be really insidious. It can sneak up on us and influence our thinking without us even realizing it.
Okay, that's starting to make sense. So we're not just talking about avoiding Debbie Downer at the office party. This is about understanding a fundamental principle of human interaction.
Exactly. And to illustrate this principle, Greene uses the example of Lola Montez, a 19th century courtesan, whose life is a pretty dramatic example of how one person's negativity can impact those around them.
Lola Montez, huh? I'm intrigued. Tell me more about her.
Well, she was born Marie Gilbert in Ireland, but reinvented herself as Lola Montez, a Spanish flamenco dancer.
Ah, so a bit of a self-made woman.
Very much so. And she used this persona to climb the social ladder, attracting powerful and wealthy men wherever she went. But here's the thing, her relationships often left a trail of destruction in their wake.
Oh, so this isn't just a case of bad luck and love. Her presence seemed to actively bring misfortune to those around her.
That's the idea. One of her most famous relationships was with Alexandre Dujarier, a prominent French newspaper owner and drama critic.
Okay, someone with a pretty solid standing in society then.
Absolutely. But Lola, aiming to revive her dancing career at the time, she kind of strategically targeted him and even engineered a chance encounter to catch his attention.
So she was playing the game, using her charm and wit to get ahead. Seems pretty savvy on her part, at least initially.
It was a calculated move, for sure. However, Dujarier, despite being totally smitten with Lola, he started to experience a whole series of misfortunes. His business ventures tanked, his social standing crumbled, he became increasingly isolated.
Oh, so things took a turn for the worse.
They did, and ultimately it all culminated in a duel.
A duel, wow. Talk about a blast from the past.
Right, well, the duel was sparked by a drunken argument, and Dujarier ended up getting killed.
So a tragic end to what started as a seemingly promising connection.
Exactly. Now, we can't definitively say that Lola was the sole cause of his downfall, but
her presence seems to have played a significant role. His life took a pretty dark turn after they met, and that's where this infection idea starts to feel very real, very tangible.
Exactly. And to make matters even more interesting, her relationship with King Ludwig of Bavaria followed a pretty similar pattern.
She had a relationship with the king.
She did, King Ludwig of Bavaria. And she captivated him using a very similar staged encounter like she did with Dujarier.
So this wasn't just a one-time thing. It seems like there was a pattern to her relationship.
There was. And despite his power and prestige, Ludwig's reign was marked by a lot of instability and scandal during their time together, ultimately forcing him to abdicate.
Wow, so two powerful men, both drawn to Lola's charisma, and both experiencing pretty significant downturns in their fortune after meeting her. This isn't just bad luck, it feels like something more intentional.
Right, and this is where Law 10 comes into play. It's a warning to be discerning about the company we keep, and to recognize that negativity, whether it's intentional or not, can have a very real impact on our lives.
So how do we apply this in the real world? I mean, Lola Montez is a pretty extreme example. How do we spot these infectors in our everyday lives, especially in the workplace?
That's a great question. And it's one we're going to delve into right after this quick break.
Sounds good. We'll be right back.
We'll be right back.
And we're back, continuing our deep dive into Law 10 of the 48 Laws of Power. Now, right before the break, we were talking about how to identify these infectors in our everyday lives.
Yes.
You know, these people whose negativity can rub off on us and potentially drag us down.
Right. And the first thing to understand is that these infectors aren't always obvious.
Okay, so we're not necessarily talking about the stereotypical grumpy cat coworker who's always complaining.
Not always. Sometimes they can be quite charismatic and even appear helpful on the surface.
So their negativity can be disguised. That makes it even trickier to spot.
It does. Think about it. You've probably encountered these types of people before. They might be chronic complainers, always focusing on the negative in every situation. Or maybe they're masters of gossip, subtly spreading negativity and undermining others.
I'm starting to see the pattern here. These behaviors, seemingly small on their own, can actually create a pretty toxic atmosphere that impacts everyone around them.
Precisely. And remember, their negativity doesn't have to be directed at you specifically for it to have an impact. Simply being in their orbit can drain your energy and cloud your judgment.
So this is about being aware of the emotional environment we're in and recognizing the subtle ways negativity can manifest. I think we need to unpack this further and figure out how to navigate these situations effectively.
So you're absolutely right. Recognizing these subtle forms of negativity, that's really crucial, especially in the workplace. Let's say you've identified a potential infector. What's the next step? You can't exactly avoid them entirely, especially in a professional setting.
Right. It's not like I can just point a finger and yell, unclean, and banish them from the office. So how do we navigate this, without being rude or unprofessional?
It really all comes down to setting boundaries.
Boundaries, okay.
It might seem counterintuitive, but sometimes the kindest thing you can do for yourself and for them is to limit your exposure.
Limit my exposure. But how do I do that without seeming standoffish? Especially if this is someone I have to work with regularly.
It's a delicate balance for sure, but think of it as strategic interaction.
Strategic interaction, I guess.
Keep your conversations focused on work tasks. Be polite but brief, and avoid getting drawn into personal conversations or gossip sessions.
So almost like redirecting the flow of the conversation. Like if they start venting or complaining, steer it back to the task at hand.
Exactly. You're not trying to change them or shut them down. You're just trying to protect your own emotional space. And remember, you're not being unkind by doing this. You're actually honoring your own need for a positive and productive work environment.
That makes sense. It's like putting on an emotional raincoat, protecting yourself from the downpour of negativity. But what about those situations where avoiding contact isn't really an option? Like, say, a team project where you're forced to work closely together.
That's a great point. And this is where the flip side of Law 10 comes into play, the power of associating with the fortunate.
Okay, so it's not just about avoiding the negative, it's about actively seeking out the positive, like a counter-infection strategy.
Precisely. When you surround yourself with people who are driven, optimistic, and successful, their energy and mindset can have a tremendously positive impact on you. Think about it. If negativity can be infectious, then surely positivity can be too right.
I like that. It's like building up your immunity to negativity by surrounding yourself with positivity antibodies. But how do we make this happen in the real world? Do I need to start hanging out with CEOs and motivational speakers?
It's not about seeking out superficial connections or chasing after status. It's about being mindful of the company you keep. Look for colleagues who inspire you, who approach challenges with a can-do attitude. Seek out mentors who have achieved the kind of success you aspire to.
So I should be paying attention to the energy and attitudes of the people I spend time with, both professionally and personally. It's about making choices that support my growth and well-being.
Exactly. And remember, this doesn't mean abandoning your old friends or cutting ties with everyone who's ever had a bad day. It's about being intentional about who you allow into your inner circle and recognizing that your emotional environment has a direct impact on your success.
This is giving me a whole new perspective on networking and building relationships. It's not just about exchanging business cards. It's about finding people who energize and inspire you.
That's a powerful insight. Now let's go back to that scenario you mentioned where you're stuck working closely with someone who might be an infector. Remember what we said about emotional contagion being like a virus? Well, think of associating with the fortunate as building up your immune system.
Okay, I'm following. So by surrounding myself with positive influences, I'm strengthening my ability to withstand the negativity that might be coming my way.
Precisely. It's about creating a buffer, an internal defense system that helps you maintain your equilibrium even in challenging situations.
This is starting to feel less like dodging negativity and more like proactively building a positive force field around myself. I'm liking this shift in perspective.
That's the spirit. Law 10 isn't about living in fear of negativity. It's about understanding its power and learning to navigate it effectively. Now, I know we've been talking a lot about recognizing and avoiding infectors, but what about those situations where you can't simply walk away? Let's say you have a difficult boss or a family member who brings a lot of negativity to the table. Are you just doomed to be infected?
That's a great question. It feels like those situations are unavoidable sometimes. You can't just quit your family or your job every time someone's having a bad day. So what do we do then?
You're right, those situations can be tricky. But remember, we have more control over our emotional responses than we often realize.
Okay, I'm intrigued. Tell me more about this idea of controlling our emotional responses. How do we do that when we're facing a constant barrage of negativity?
It all comes down to mastering your emotions. This might sound a bit esoteric, but it's actually a very practical skill.
Okay, walk me through this. How do I master my emotions, especially when I'm dealing with someone who's constantly pushing my buttons?
The first step is awareness. Pay attention to how you react emotionally when you're around this person. Do you feel anxious, drained, or irritable? Recognizing these patterns is key.
So step one is basically emotional self-diagnosis. Figure out how I'm being affected.
Exactly. Once you're aware of your reactions, you can start to detach emotionally.
Detach, isn't that a bit cold?
Not necessarily. It's not about being uncaring. It's about recognizing that their negativity is their issue, not yours. You don't have to take it personally or allow it to dictate your emotional state.
So it's like building an emotional wall. But that seems like it could be exhausting to maintain constantly.
It's not about building walls. It's about cultivating a sense of inner peace that isn't dependent on external circumstances. It's about choosing not to engage with their negativity. Don't argue, don't try to fix them, and don't get sucked into their drama.
So I'm basically becoming a negativity ninja, deflecting negativity with my emotional agility.
I like that analogy. It's about moving with grace and intention, even in the midst of chaos.
This is making me rethink how I approach difficult people. It's not about changing them. It's about changing my reaction to them.
That's the key takeaway here. Remember, you always have a choice in how you respond. You can choose to be reactive and get swept up in their negativity, or you can choose to be proactive and maintain your own emotional equilibrium.
This has been incredibly insightful. I'm already starting to see how I can apply these principles in my own life. So we've talked about avoiding those infectors, right, and kind of bolstering our own resilience. But I'm really curious about this flip side you mentioned earlier, this whole idea of associating with the fortunate. What does that actually look like in a practical sense?
Yeah, it's a really powerful principle, and it kind of builds on what we've been discussing. Just as negativity can be contagious, so can positivity and a mindset that's really geared towards success.
So it's not just about catching their good luck. It's more about absorbing their habits and their perspectives, their ways of thinking.
You got it. When you surround yourself with people who are driven, optimistic, and yes, successful, their energy can be incredibly influential. They become role models, mentors, even just sources of inspiration.
I can see that. You start to see what's possible, and you learn from their approaches, and you kind of raise your own standards just by being around them.
Exactly. And what's so fascinating is that it creates this kind of virtuous cycle, right? As you grow and become more successful yourself, you then attract other like-minded individuals, which just amplifies the effect even further.
So it's not about social climbing or just chasing after wealthy people. It's about aligning yourself with people who embody the qualities that you actually want to cultivate in yourself.
That's a really insightful way to put it. Let's take an example from history to kind of illustrate this a bit. Napoleon Bonaparte, despite his military genius, was known to lack a certain social finesse.
Okay.
He recognized this and intentionally surrounded himself with individuals like Charles-Maurice de Talleyrand, a master diplomat and strategist.
So Napoleon was drawn to Talleyrand's success and sought to kind of learn from him, even though they were in totally different fields.
Exactly. Napoleon saw in Talleyrand the qualities that he wanted to develop in himself. The polish, the strategic thinking, the ability to navigate those really complex social situations. He understood that proximity to these traits could actually help him grow.
This is giving me a whole new framework for how I think about the people I choose to spend time with. It's not just about liking someone or finding them entertaining. It's about considering the impact they have on my mindset and on my goals.
Yeah, it's a subtle but profound shift in perspective. And remember, this principle applies to all areas of life, not just professional settings. The friends you choose, the mentors you seek out, even the books you read and the podcasts you listen to, they all contribute to the overall emotional and intellectual environment that you inhabit.
So how do we apply this in a really concrete way? Should I be attending every industry event and trying to corner the most successful person in the room?
It's not about being opportunistic or chasing after those really fleeting connections. It's about building genuine relationships with people who truly inspire you. Look for people who share your values, who are kind of on a similar path of growth, who challenge you in a positive way.
So it's about being intentional and discerning about who I let into my inner circle, both physically and emotionally.
Precisely.
Yeah.
And it's not a passive process. You have to put yourself out there, networking, engage in conversations, and be open to new connections. And the more you do this, the more you'll find yourself surrounded by individuals who really uplift and inspire you.
This has been a fascinating deep dive into Law 10. We've covered a lot of ground, from recognizing those infectors to building up our own resilience to really understanding the power of associating with the fortunate. Any final thoughts for our listeners as they navigate this really complex world of emotional influence?
Just remember, you have more agency than you might realize. You can choose who you let into your inner circle. You can cultivate a mindset that prioritizes positivity and growth. And you can actively seek out those who really embody the qualities that you want to develop in yourself.
And that's it for today's Flagstone Trail discussion. We appreciate you listening. Until next time, remember to be mindful of your emotional environment, cultivate your own positivity, and may the company you keep propel you towards success.